Joining us now, member of the House Oversight and Intelligence Committees, Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois. Mike Barnicle, Jonathan Lemire, Donnie Deutsch, and Susan Del Percio all back as well with us this morning. So, Congressman, I guess, first of all, what is your reaction from what you heard in terms of the testimony from Gordon Sondland?
Well, I can't get into the specifics of the testimony, but what I walked away with the feeling about is that Mr. Sondland definitely pointed to Giuliani as engaging in some suspect activities, and then he had some selective amnesia about his own involvement in those activities. But clearly, the deposition kind of provided additional corroboration for the idea that, Giuliani was running a shadow foreign policy, not in the best interest of the country, but possibly in the best interest of his personal clients, including Donald Trump and potentially others.
Yeah, and then at the end of the day, of course, all this corroboration that you're gathering in these hearings just blurted out by Mick Mulvaney. Right. We'll get to that in just a second. Here's the take from Republican Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio yesterday following testimony by U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland. Take a look.
He confirmed what Ambassador Volker had told us a week ago when he said there was no quid pro quo relative to 2016 and no quid pro quo relative to any investigation into the Hunter Biden situation. We have all said the President of the United States can have who he deems is going to do the job that he thinks needs to be done working for him. And if you got other questions for Mr. Giuliani, like I said, my guess is to be happy to answer them.
Did Jim Jordan get the memo? I mean, even Mick Mulvaney yesterday made the connection. What did he tell you guys?
I disagree with Congressman Jordan about his assertion that somehow Mr. Sondland backed up the Republican theory that there was no quid pro quo. But secondly, you're absolutely right. Mick Mulvaney, in a moment of candor, explained exactly what was going on, which is that, military aid to the Ukraine was being held up for assistance with a political initiative. I think somebody pointed out this sounded like a scene from Law and Order. To me, it looked like a scene where Jack Nicholson tells you the truth in A Few Good Men. And so I think that Mr. Mulvaney gave a new meaning to acting in his role as acting chief of staff.
Congressman, when Mr. Sondland when Gordon was testifying before the committee, all you could think of, at least me, was the phrase, only the best people. That's the people that Donald Trump decided he was going to have around him. Did you get the impression that you got the full truth about his role in the Ukraine? Or was it partial truth and him trying to cover up what actually happened in terms of his own involvement?
I think it's a little bit of the latter, Mike. I felt that, like I said, he had temporary amnesia with regard to many critical meetings and conversations involving himself, but he had a vivid recollection of Giuliani and his role, and the fact that the president basically directed Mr. Sondland and others to go to Giuliani to figure out what was required for the military aid to be released to the Ukraine.
So he did his best to not implicate himself.
That was the feeling that I walked away with, yes.
Congressman Donnie Deutsch, nice to talk to you. You sat in on the hearings all week. Speaker Pelosi, I think rightfully so, has decided to not take a vote yet on moving forward. What do you think the tipping point would be to move past that goal line?
Well, as you know, next week we have another series of witnesses coming in, including, very importantly, Ambassador Taylor, who wrote those very interesting text messages, again, kind of pointing to what appeared to be a quid pro quo involving military aid. I think that the more that we get into this, I think, quite frankly, the more it looks like we need to figure out, what's the full extent of the scheme that, the whistleblower initially alleged? And then secondly, who's involved with it? Because at the end of the day, we don't, in my humble opinion, I'm speaking for myself, I don't think that we should prematurely conclude this investigation because of a deadline when we really need to know the full extent of who's responsible, and we don't want this to happen again.
Congressman, it's Jonathan Lemire. Mick Mulvaney sort of tripped up yesterday on the Ukraine matter, but he went out to speak to the cameras about announcing that the G7 is going to be held at the president's golf course in Doral, just outside of Miami, Florida. Two questions for you. First one, do you think that's appropriate? I can guess your answer on that. But secondly, if you don't, what can Congress do about it? Is there anything that, in terms of like funding that can be stopped or any other measure that if you feel this isn't appropriate, you could try to prevent it from happening?
I absolutely think not only was it not appropriate, but it's illegal and potentially unconstitutional under the Emoluments Clause. With regard to what we can do about it, currently the Oversight Committee is conducting an investigation with regard to the Emoluments Clause. And yes, there are certain remedies with regard to funding, as well as other measures that can be taken with regard to it. I just want to point out one small thing or big thing, which is that this move yesterday happened on the same day that we were mourning the passing of the great Elijah Cummings, the chairman of the Oversight Committee and a champion of checks and balances on the executive branch. Even though Elijah is no longer with us, I can guarantee you that the Oversight Committee is going to continue to investigate this and try to hold the White House accountable here.
Congressman Susan Del Percio here. As your investigations continue, I understand why they have to happen behind closed doors. But we keep getting drips and drips out, and they're all shaded by whoever's speaking in their opinion. When will the public really be able to see what was said, if it's not the actual hearing, the transcripts? Because at this point, we've been going on for a couple of weeks, and people are getting frustrated. They believe that the inquiry should happen. They understand there's national security issues. But they also feel that if you're going to take these steps, it should be public.
Sure, and Chairman Schiff has said that it's his intention to publish these transcripts in short order and then hold public hearings hopefully soon. But in the meantime, we have to do this in closed proceedings for two reasons. One, we don't want witnesses to align their testimony with each other. It's very important that we are able to hear their testimony unfiltered or uncolored as much as possible by other people's testimony. And then the second thing is, in past impeachment proceedings, there was actually a special counsel that worked in secrecy with a grand jury. That happened in Watergate and then in the Bill Clinton impeachment. And in this case, we don't have that mechanism because the DOJ specifically refused to open an investigation when this matter, the Ukraine matter, was referred to the criminal division. So we are in effect having to do this kind of grand jury type of part of the process. Once this happens, then we will go to the open setting, I'm sure, in short order.
Committee's Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mika.